Well, I won't. No, doing just fine. Just fine. I hate calling you while you're down in, but actually, I was just calling to ask a favor. Trying to, my memory is horrible.
Okay, excuse me, everyone on the joining us
We're a
virtually.
customer that wants to
We're hearing a little
use
some inter-office conversation, I think.
canyon water for dust suppression.
And while it's enjoyable, and I'd like to
Can't
discuss,
find the water codes.
move on. Kim, do you have the ability to mute
For
mics?
this
Or does anyone have the ability?
Thomas Hill.
David's talking to you.
Your man, huh? Okay. And record.
I don't actually. I don't expect you to.
Okay, we'll proceed to agenda item 1, roll call. Can we proceed with the roll call, please?
Yes, sir. As a reminder for all of our voting members participating online, please remember to turn on your cameras for the public. We'll start with Chair Andrus.
Present.
Amber Beard. Present. John Byra. What's that, John? Kurt Campbell.
Here.
Thank you. Patrick Garcia for Ray Chavez. Will Conley. Debbie Farmer.
Here.
Charlie Flatton. Steve Graham.
Here.
Thank you. Vic Hildebrand. Tom Youngman.
Present.
Thank you. Russell Lavis.
Here.
Thank you. Glenn Lord.
Present.
Thank you. Daniel Meyer. Gary Middleton.
Here.
Thank you. Robert Fuentes.
Here.
Vanessa Pugh Williams.
Here.
Thank you. Humberto Ramos.
Here.
Thank you. Steve Ramsey. Weldon Riggs. Roland Ruiz.
Here.
Thank you. Lane Short for Diane Savage. Darren Simmons. Mitchell Sowards.
Present.
Thank you. Jonathan Stinson.
Present.
Thank you. Heather Sumter.
Here.
Thank you. Tom Taggart.
Here.
Thank you. Ian Taylor.
Here.
Thank you. Diane Wassenich. Adam Yablonsky.
Here.
Thank you.
We have quorum present.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Appreciate everyone that dialed in and connecting virtually. As usual, if you think you're experiencing any sort of technical difficulty participating in the meeting, I believe there's some form of chat feature. If you can't make yourself heard, please speak up through the chat and we'll try to address that. And we'll try to take our time as we move through it to afford people opportunity to unmute their mic and make comments. They need to. If I move on or we move on before you've had an opportunity to speak up, interrupt, and we'll deal with that. We'll move to agenda item 2. Is there any public comment? Do we have any written public comments? No requests submitted to make public comment. Is there anyone in the room or present on the virtual meeting that would like to make public comment at this time? Okay, there being none, we'll move to agenda item 3. approval of the minutes of the previous meeting of the regional planning group. I believe the draft minutes were sent out to the members in advance of the meeting in the packet. Should have had an opportunity to review those minutes. Is there any discussion on the minutes or requests to revise or amend the minutes?
I move for adoption.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those, we'll forego it. We'll adopt the motion by consensus. Is there any opposition to passing the motion? There being none, we'll consider the motion passed. Now we'll move to agenda item 4, status reports and communication about Texas Water Development Board. Mr. Corey, you're going to make a verbal presentation?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth McCoy with the Texas Water Development Board. Let me know if you can't hear me. Just a few brief updates for you this morning. The inaugural Interregional Planning Council dissolved upon adoption of the 2022 State Water Plan. And in September, the TWDB Executive Administrative.
Hi, excuse me. Is it possible for you to speak a little bit closer to the mic? It's a little bit hard to hear.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. See, is this better? Okay, great. So the inaugural Interregional Planning Council dissolved upon adoption of the 2022 State Water Plan. A letter was sent to the planning group soliciting nominations for representatives to serve on the next council. So we're asking that the planning groups nominate one member to serve on the council and then also to nominate an alternate. And the deadline to submit those nominations is February the 28th. You may recall back in the summer, we solicited some preliminary input from all of the planning group stakeholders on the state water planning guidance principles and also some other regional water planning rule topics. So we have been taking a look at the input that we received, and we're preparing some rulemaking materials to address that feedback. So we anticipate a rule proposal to be presented to the TWDB board by the end of the year. And if the board approves posting of those rulemaking documents, they'll be posted in the Texas Register for a 30-day public comment period. But we will kind of keep you guys informed as that item is scheduled for our board to consider. And then lastly, I just want to mention that we have started using a new email address for our broadcast communications to the planning groups, and that is regionalwaterplanning@twdb.texas.gov. So just kind of keep an eye out for emails from that new email address. That's all the updates that I have. Are there any questions?
Thank you. No, that's great. Appreciate that update. Water board. Any discussion on that matter? Any comments or questions? Okay, there being none, we'll move to agenda item 5, staff reports, communications related to regional water planning, including reports by the chair, regional liaison, groundwater management area representatives, and members of the planning group. I'll start with a couple of items that I can provide the group an update on. With recent discussions with Sarah and Black and Beach, it's my understanding that we're nearing completion of the contracting process to bring Black and Beach on as a technical consultant for Region L. We anticipate that being completed certainly by our next meeting, which we anticipate being in February. When that agreement's finalized, we'll notify the group via email that that's occurred. Let me move on to Region B. There's nothing really to report in terms of liaison. The next meeting will occur in February. I'll attend that meeting, provide a report after that. With that, let me turn it over to the other members. Are there any other members that are prepared to make a report to the planning group and would like to do so now?
Dan Meyer from, go ahead. Daniel Meyer from GMA 10 asked that I provide an update to the planning group on his behalf. GMA 10 recently adopted DFCs on October 26th of 2021. These that were adopted are the same that were approved during the last DFC planning cycle. Aquifers in GMA 10 with DFCs include the Trinity Fresh Edwards in Northern GMA subdivision, Saline Edwards in Northern GMA subdivision, Fresh Edwards in Western GMA subdivision, Austin Buda Limestone, and Leona Gravel. The GMA 10 will be submitting these DFCs along with an explanatory report through PWGD.
Down here.
Very good.
Cisco.
I'll provide an update regarding GMA 15. On October 14th, representatives met, adopted a DFC. We anticipate we'll meet again on November 14 to consider a potential revision to that adopted DFC, and then meet again in December to finalize and adopt our explanatory report so we can make a submission by the deadline in January 2022. So we're, as far as GMA 15 is concerned, we're on track to satisfy the joint planning process requirements. Are there any other reports by members?
Kirk Campbell, GMA 9. We have a joint planning committee meeting on November 15th, and we will be, I believe, confirming the committee's recommendation to keep our DFC as is, but that comes up on the 15th of November.
Thank you.
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for joining.
I did. I'm sorry I was a little late, but I am here, and I did attend the Region K meeting, which for the first time since the pandemic started was in person in Austin in a very big room, and I could hear much less of what was going on than I could on Zoom, unfortunately. But there's nothing earth-shatteringly new to report. They're just in the beginning stages the way we are.
Very fine. Thank you. Any other reports? Okay, we'll move to agenda item 6, discussion and nomination of one planning group member, one alternate to serve on the next regional planning council. This is the group that Ms. McCoy provided you an update on. They've asked us to nominate one representative from the regional planning group, one alternate to support that nominated individual. A couple other things to point out, though. This is an appointment to a group that should exist until the next state water plan is adopted. I believe that's correct. And it's my understanding, while there's no set meeting schedule, they do have a responsibility to report to TWDB from that group. A report, at least, that addresses things like facilitating communication between regional groups and attempting or finding ways to alleviate conflicts through the planning process. So while only the future will tell what that involves, I anticipate there will be some real activity to that, and it will not occur at Region L. So any members that might think that's sub-function or subcommittee of Region L, that's not the case. It's a separate independent group. With that said, we'll open it to the floor. Any discussion on nominations regarding one other matter, I should say. We anticipate having our next meeting in February, February 3rd, if I recall correctly. The deadline to make the nomination is February 28th. So if this matter isn't addressed at this meeting, our last opportunity to address it will be at that February 3rd. So with that, we'll open it to the floor. Any discussion or comments?
I had a quick question. Just, I guess, historically, the first council, was it mostly the chairs of the regions, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. It was a mix of chairs as well.
I do think for Region L, I believe Don served in that. I'm off the record here against all.
I think it was
It's
Suzanne.
Suzanne and
Well, If the group would like for me to serve, I'd be willing to serve and represent this region.
I'd be more than happy to make that motion.
I knew you
But
would.
I'd be more than happy to second it too.
Yeah. But we need an alternate, so we've identified 2 candidates. Yeah, no, so I'd be happy to serve in that role. I certainly understand if someone else has an interest in doing so, I can work for everyone.
I'd happy to be your alternate.
Okay, so Karen's gonna make a motion, nominate.
I would be glad to.
All right, well, I'll play with it some more.
That,
Mhm.
Tim Andrews become our
Oh, yeah.
nomination, and Mr. Stinson with GDRA would be our alternate.
I'll second that. Very good. We have a motion and section. A motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Okay, if there's none, is there anyone opposed to that? And if not, we'll consider it adopted by consensus. Speak up now. Okay, we'll consider that motion adopted, and we'll provide reports on that committee as meetings occur. Kendall, you'll complete the process of submitting the nomination. Okay, with that, we'll move to agenda item 7, discussion and appropriate action regarding recommendation by the executive committee on vacancies of the planning group voting membership. So at present, we have 2 vacancies. We have a vacancy associated with the county's interest and a vacancy associated with power generation. Those positions have been vacant for some time, and we've been soliciting nominations for some time. Recently, as you recall, we, in our last meeting, it was our last meeting, or meeting 2 meetings ago, we considered nominations that we had received for other vacancies and seated members. We did not, at that time, have nominations for these 2 groups, hence the need to continue the solicitation. That solicitation period is concluded, and in this additional period, we received 1 nomination. This was a nomination for the county's interest group. The nomination was for Mr. Travis Pruski. That name may sound familiar because Mr. Pruski was also nominated previous cycle. He was nominated in that previous cycle to serve, or nominated under the interest group of municipalities. We had the unique situation in that cycle where we had more nominations for that interest group than we had vacancies. And ultimately, Mr. Pruski wasn't elected to serve as a member at that time. Fortunately, Mr. Pruski remained interested and has been nominated again. He was nominated by the county judge in Wilson County. The nomination form, very similar to the previous nomination form. Certainly with that nomination from a county judge, from my view, it's a qualified nomination for the county interest group. I will point out for the membership, if you look at your packet material, while discussing the matter at the executive committee meeting, which was an open meeting, some of you may have joined, I'm not certain, but we held a meeting earlier this week of the executive committee, and during the conversation and discussion of this nomination, we identified what I submit to you as a non-consequential inaccuracy or inconsistency on the nomination form, which appears to be associated with the renomination of Mr. Pruski. But my view is the application makes it clear it's applying for the county vacancy, county interest vacancy. The executive committee discussed the matter and passed a motion. It was unanimously adopted that we would recommend to this group that you seek Mr. Pruski as a voting member of the South Central Texas Regional Planning Group in the interest group of counties. We've asked Mr. Pruski to attend the meeting. He's here today. We want to afford him the opportunity before any action is taken for him to introduce himself. I can tell you, and I believe this, he's very much interested in participating, and I think that's great. But we'll give him a chance, if he'd like to take it, to introduce himself and perhaps give you some thoughts, and of course, open it to questions from the membership, should you have any questions for Mr. Pruski. Mr. Pruski, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Travis Pruski. I currently work with the Oasis River Authority. I was nominated by Judge Jackson in Wilson County. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and hopefully we'll get your vote to get voting member with you guys. One of the benefits I do have is representing counties. I have working relationships with 10 of your 22 county judges already, so I feel that I would definitely be able to represent not just Wilson County, but all the counties throughout the region, and I hope to make relationships with the other counties, the judges that I don't quite know yet, but I'm here to serve our region and hopefully be a good member.
Are there any questions or comments regarding Mr. Pruski or his nomination to the planning group? Okay. There being none, I'll make the motion that Mr. Pruski be seated as a voting member of the planning group under the county's interest group.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? There being none, if there's any opposition to that motion passing by consensus, please speak up now. There being none, we'll consider Mr. Pruski elected to the planning group. Welcome aboard, Mr. Pruski. I believe you qualified, but let's just lay it out. There's some training you'll need to complete if you haven't already. It's my understanding you have. If you would submit the necessary certificates to Kendall so that she can record that in our records, and consider yourself on board as of now. You're a voting member.
Welcome aboard.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment on this item with regards to the roll call. I think I heard roll call for Steve Ramsey. I thought Steve Ramsey resigned from this board. Can we verify that? Because if he resigned,
Excellent question.
there'd be a vacancy. So I'm not sure if he received something from Steve Ramsey resigning from Regional. Because again, all the discussions I've had with Steve Ramsey, he's resigned from this.
Okay. Let's be clear, you can't trust my memory on that. But you've either suggested it and I'm now remembering it, or I remember it too. So that may be the case. If we could, please look into that, make any necessary contact with Mr. Ramsey, and if you need a record to record that resignation, please obtain that from him if in fact that's what he's choosing to do. And we can, at the next, I suspect we could take action under this agenda item to authorize Sarah to make the necessary solicitation if in fact that is a vacancy. I assume we can also have the choice of continuing to solicit nominations for the outstanding vacancy for generation as well. What's the planning group's pleasure? Is there any interest in continuing the solicitation? Kendall, if you would, let me know, is there, or remind me, is there a cost associated with us continuing that solicitation? Running notices in newspaper, at one point that was a fairly burdensome process, correct?
Yes, sir. So the amendment was made that we did not have to go out to newspapers.
Okay.
And because of that, it is not a cost prohibitive.
So there's no significant cost or effort issue associated with continuing the solicitation for the existing vacancy, and if the position that Mr. Ramsey filled is now vacant, soliciting nominations back. Not significant. Is it, you have any other comments? Would that be acceptable to, if in fact he's resigned? Okay. I wonder if the group might find it acceptable that we just have a standing authorization should there be any vacancies occur in the interim periods between meetings, that we authorize Sarah to solicit nominations for those positions, purely as a matter of efficiency, to try and keep the membership group or the positions filled. Would that be agreeable to the group? If you would. Okay. Second. Okay, we have a motion and second to authorize Sarah to seek, solicit nominations for any and all vacancies that exist now or arise in the interim period during this planning period, or planning cycle. Is there any opposition to, any discussion on that motion? There being none, is there any opposition to that motion passing? Okay, we'll consider that motion passed, and you're authorized to make any and all necessary.
Mr. Chair, in relation to the electric generation vacancy,
Yes.
I think it would be, and I know that we've kind of been asked to help facilitate somebody applying or nominating someone if that's appropriate. It may be beneficial to members of the group if we could get a listing of the electric generators. I think some of us know many of those, but we may not have, a full knowledge of all the generators in the region. So I think that would be useful to us if we could get that information to help facilitate filling that.
I agree, and Kendall, would you be able to assemble that list of generating, pass it on to all the membership?
We did the planning commission, we just recently filled that, a gentleman from Hunter, and I'll ask if he's interested in filling. In addition to League of 13, floodplain as well.
Okay,
Just recently filled that spot.
Please do. Okay. Like the energy. Yes, so we'll get that list, and incidentally, if you would, with the same message, notify us of the outcome of your investigation regarding Mr. Ramsey and any other vacancies. Perhaps we will know. If there are, let us know. Please. Okay, gentlemen, we'll move to agenda item 8.
I'll ask him if he can come
by. If you would indulge me here, I'm going to ask forgiveness. I made a mistake on the agenda item. At our staff work group meeting, my intention was to request that there be an agenda item placed on this agenda to allow for the membership to discuss and consider generally the development and establishment of any subcommittees of the group to address any potential significant issues that would serve as a potential obstacle to us completing the planning process. Really to open the discussion to the floor, to try to identify those early in the process so that we could, if the group chose to address those topics, we could do so. Unfortunately, and due to my failing to review the agenda before the posting, this agenda item was very narrowly described. In fact, it describes the establishment of an environmental subcommittee. I recognize that that may cause some concern, and some may even interpret that as there being some objective to establish such a subcommittee. All I can give you is my assurances that was not the intent, but inadvertently came about on the agenda. I recognize this presents potentially some concern for some of the membership, if not all the membership. And so with that, I would ask that the group indulge me, allow us to postpone any discussion of any subcommittees to address technical issues until a future meeting. I would submit to you that we place it on the agenda at our next regular meeting. And if there's any interest in any subcommittee, environmental or otherwise, at that time we can have that discussion. Again, my apologies if that's created any difficulty within for any of the membership or any of those associated agencies. Is there any discussion on this agenda item? Any opposition to postponing its discussion regarding subcommittees to a future meeting?
There it is.
You need a motion to table?
Well, let's not table this agenda item because it's so specific. So we'll, so long as there's no discussion here, we'll just move on to the agenda item. Limited discussion about the error to be incorporated in the minutes.
Change the caption next time to reflect a broader.
Yes, absolutely. Right now we're striking and environmental. Yeah, so again, my apologies. I've asked I'll ensure that I more carefully review the final agenda item before it's posted, and I'm hopeful I can avoid that mistake.
You enter information on here.
Bruce is here.
Oh, very good.
One of the tribulations of being in your position.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. With that, we'll move to agenda item 9, review and discussion of the planning group guiding principles. Frankly, this was meant to be a companion item, and we've touched on this several meetings ago, and there was frankly no real discussion, or at least at that time, any interest identified for undertaking a review and revision of the guiding principles. However, we've now started a new cycle. Those guiding principles were adopted 2014 timeframe and sometime after. But they're dated, not that their adoption is dated anyway. In the new cycle, and I think the suggestion was made that perhaps, if nothing else, it would be appropriate to readopt or reaffirm those guiding principles, to make record clear that we consider those guiding principles to be applicable to this plan. Hence the purpose of the agenda. So with that, that background, I'll open it to the floor. Is there any discussion or comment on the agenda item?
The month of August being pulled from another file.
No, it's the same one, but if you.
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick.
Hello, Diane. Thank you.
May I just say that I think our guiding principles were as best as we could make them at the time. I'm not perfectly clear on if there's any changes legislatively or otherwise that might affect those guiding principles. So anybody that has anything to offer in that kind of explanation would be helpful. I'm not sure who would be the person who would know the most about that. It may be our TWDB representative.
How do you save a new one for?
Can you address that?
Sure, so for the last one.
The rest of the year.
The last
Which is the last month you.
Bill 1905 did affect the planning group, some of the responsibilities. Removes the requirement to prioritize the projects in the regional water plans. And it also removes the requirement for the infrastructure financing report that is due, that was previously due to the regional water plan. But I'm not specifically sure if those are mentioned in the guidance.
While I can't state with absolute certainty, I reviewed the guiding principles before the meeting, and I may recall no one to those two topics.
Tim,
So,
I could not hear any of her discussion and very little of yours. So are you saying that you don't know of anything that happened at the legislature that would affect our guiding principles?
For each one, but then there's.
I'm sorry, let me try to be a little clearer and hopefully, can you hear me now?
But in August,
yes.
It wasn't a folder, it was just.
My comment was after Ms. McCoy's comment regarding House Bill 1985.
I don't know why one has a folder and one has the Excel thing.
Excuse me just a minute. Is it their ability the other one?
It seems like there's some audio noise coming from Mr. Garcia's.
Who is it? Just call them out by name.
Okay.
And this is used for the Soul versus Cleans? Or? Okay.
Yeah, all the.
Okay, I'll try to be.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
It's Mr. Garcia. I muted him 3 times. If he could keep himself muted, please. That would be helpful.
Mr. Garcia, it appears that perhaps inadvertently your mic is being unmuted, and we're having a lot of overtalk. So if you could, please attempt to keep your mic muted, unless, of course, you have something to contribute. We want to hear that. We're not trying to mute your voice, so to speak, but at least the background noise, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Okay, so Diane, my comment was simply that based on my review of the guiding principles prior to the meeting, I do not recall any guiding principles addressing matters related to prioritization of strategy specifically, or the, what was it, the infrastructure?
Yeah, the infrastructure financing report is the second part.
Right. Frankly, I wasn't even aware that existed. The point is, I know of no discussion within the guiding principles that address those two topics under House Bill 1905, and therefore, at least from my view, I'm unaware of any revisions that need to be considered because of the adoption of that legislation.
Chairman, yes, sir. One comment in relation to that, I think it makes sense to have the group consider a reaffirmation of Chapter 8 and what we've incorporated in that. It's taken a long time, I think, to work through a lot of those items, and I think they'll apply in all the planning cycles, probably equally. I would say though that I know that at least historically, some of the items that we have made changes on have been as rules and direction from Water Development Board and others may have changed and re-emphasized and caused us to focus on certain areas differently. And I guess as long as, I would just suggest that we may want to keep our minds open to the fact that as we receive direction and other things evolve in this planning cycle, we may need to revisit Chapter 8 before we finalize the document. Certainly reaffirming those, I think, and refreshing that makes perfect sense.
Okay. I think that's a great point, Tom. So great. Let me ask a question. Lauren, are you still on the meeting, and can you?
Yes, I'm still here.
Address this comment. I think you and I discussed that perhaps there might be some usefulness in reaffirming and documenting the readoption or reaffirmation of these guiding principles for this plan.
Yes, sir.
Is that accurate? Is that what?
Yes, sir. I think it would be helpful, especially for the new planning members, to review what the guiding principles are as a whole at the next meeting, perhaps, and then to also discuss at least updating some of the dates that are in here, because in some instances, the guiding principles refer to the 2021 Regional Water Plan, and it would be helpful to go ahead and update those to the 2026 Regional Water Plan to be consistent with this cycle.
Okay, so Lauren, is that something you could assist us with if we place this agenda item on the next agenda? Could you identify those instances where it refers to the previous planning cycle and any other references to the past time period that need to be adjusted for us? Would you be able to identify that? And then at the meeting, we could have a brief, I would think hopefully a brief review of those guiding principles. I wouldn't want to try to undertake a lot of wordsmithing of any of those principles in that setting. But could you do that initial part for us, Lauren?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, this is Diane again. I would suggest that we review them, as you said, and if all is acceptable to stay the same with just date changes, we could certainly affirm them again. But if there is one or two that need further discussion, we could affirm everything but that one or two and appoint a committee at that time to review that, maybe.
Thank you. I think that's a good suggestion. Yes, sir.
I would say, for example, on Principle 6, it seems like that might need some wordsmithing, because it appears that the language at the time was a change in what had previously occurred. So maybe it just needs to be updated in the context.
Okay.
For example, initiate environmental assessments earlier in the regional planning process, earlier than what?
Oh, I follow you. Okay. Okay.
Just those sorts of things.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Reeves. That's good input. Well, members, you have homework, I suppose. So we'll plan to do this. We'll add this agenda item to the next meeting. Notice we will had the input from the technical consultants regarding revisions that are meant to bring the guiding principles up to date, no substantive changes being recommended, I suppose, from the technical committee on any of the guiding principles. And then members, as you review those guiding principles, those changes, you anticipate recommending to the committee, if they're relatively brief and concise and don't make material changes, I suppose we can consider those at that time, recognizing that under that agenda item, we may find it more appropriate to move that off to a subcommittee. Is that agreeable to the group? Any opposition to that approach? Okay. Okay, well that, no, excuse me. Okay. That's agenda item 9. We'll move to agenda item 10, discussion, appropriate action regarding nomination of John Byram to serve as the Region J liaison. At the August meeting, Mr. Yablonsky notified the group that he and Mr. Byram had discussed the matter and felt that Mr. Byram might be better positioned to serve as a liaison to Region J, and asked that we place this agenda item on this meeting, and so we've done so. Of course, for any new members or members that can't recall, the role of liaisons to other regional planning groups is one of our measures we intend to employ to try to identify or perhaps resolve conflicts between regions, so it's an important position. Mr. Yablonsky, if you're present, did you want to make any additional comments on that matter?
No, I don't think any additional comments are necessary. I'll go ahead and make the motion to nominate him as Region J liaison.
I'm sorry, nominate who? John Byram?
Mr. Byram, yeah.
Okay, excuse me, I thought I heard Tim. There are limits. No, he said him. Oh, him. Okay, excuse me.
Did I? Sorry. I definitely meant John Byram.
New assignment.
Virtual nominations.
Yeah. Okay, very fine. We have a motion. Is there a second? Mr. Youngman's made the second. Thank you, Mr. Youngman. Any additional discussion? Okay, there being none, is there any opposition to asking Mr. Byram to serve as Region J liaison? Okay, there being none, we'll consider the motion adopted. Okay, we'll move to agenda item 11, discussion and selection of regional planning group meetings for calendar year 2022. We have, for new members, if you're not aware, we typically meet on a quarterly basis. We typically meet first Thursday of the month in each of those quarters, those months being February, May, and August. I believe in your packet you have a list of dates. Those dates for next calendar year being proposed for regular meetings are February 3rd, May 5th, August 4th, and November 3rd. Someone check me, make sure I didn't transpose any of those numbers. So those are right dates?
Yes.
And it's my understanding that at present, if we adopt those meeting dates, we anticipate being able to meet in this room. We'll discuss meetings in a moment, but let's establish the dates so we can meet on those dates. Okay. So we've got both dates and a meeting place. That's a change from past year. So great. Is there any opposition or comments regarding these meeting dates and their frequency and so on? Okay. Is there, excuse me, is there a motion to establish those as our meeting dates for calendar year 2022?
So I move we adopt them. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Graham, second by Mr. Middleton. Anyone opposed to that motion? Speak up now, please.
Will the meeting be held at 9:30?
I anticipate they will. In years past, when we had heavy workloads, we had moved meeting dates up or even had other activities prior to the meeting, but yes, you should anticipate that. Okay. No opposition, we'll consider those dates adopted as our regular meeting dates. Move to agenda item 12, the next meeting and agenda items for that meeting. Before we go too much further, I'd like to discuss our method of meeting. Presently, we're using this hybrid, so-called hybrid format, whereby there's both an in-person component open to the public and the ability for members and the public, of course, to join virtually. It has certain requirements, and we've discussed those in the past. But our other option, of course, is to not host these meetings in this hybrid format, but rather have them as in-person meetings only. I'd be interested in hearing, if the membership has any strong feelings one way or the other. There are some practical considerations. In particular, meeting in this room, at least at present, there are limitations on its capacity to 30 people. Those of you who don't know, we have more than 30 members. So having a full house would be practically impossible. So unless there's a new location identified that can host more attendance, I think our option is pretty clear that we'll have to continue for the near future, at least, with hybrid meetings. Is there any opposition to the hybrid meeting method?
Is there bylaws?
So this is Vanessa Quigg-Williams. I don't have any opposition to doing hybrid meetings. I do intend moving forward to come in person because I think, it's certainly more conducive to discussion and I think easier to hear everybody that's present. But I do think that having a hybrid option enables greater public participation, especially when we get a little bit more into substantive discussion. I think that will encourage that. I know that with the GMA meetings during COVID, when they were held virtually, that the Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts reported that they had far more participation than they did in the past when they were all in person. And of course, if there's a conflict for all of us in work life, or it might be easier to have the option now and then to do this virtually. But I definitely intend to start coming in person.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Do our bylaws allow that? Or do we need the bylaws to confirm that we need to change them or just allow for it? Just so
Let me address that real quick. Kendall, if you would, if you could take a minute, could you look at our meeting provisions in the bylaw and identify if there's any conflicts of holding a hybrid meeting with our bylaws?
There shouldn't be, no, sir.
Okay, it's already.
Especially with the government.
Apparently not. Yes, sir. Ms. Mills.
I'm just wondering, after Sarah acquired that additional space, which we met in this last Region L meeting, the footprint of that room appears somewhat larger than this room. And I was just wondering if that would be, if they have the ability in that room, this is a question, I'm not asking for any action, to at least us investigate whether or not that might be a possibility if it would hold. Because if the room limitation is 30 and we've got 32 or 4 members, we need to find another spot. But it needs to be a spot that fits the group, is all I'm saying. And that, I don't know about that room, if it would or would not. Parking might be a problem there, though.
We can certainly look at that. We also have room maximums. I don't know the number. It seems like it's more than 30, but it may not be. We can investigate that and get back to the group. We are happy to host, but I don't know the room numbers.
Again, by having 30-something members plus all the staff that you see around, I mean, we're talking about a room at least 50 people, I would say.
Need to make sure there's room for the public also.
Sure, absolutely. Well, if it's agreeable to the planning group, while we intend to meet here and appreciate the offer to allow us to do so. If you'll investigate the opportunity to meet your facility, Grant, that'd be appreciated. And should we find a more advantageous location to meet and still satisfy our technical requirements, et cetera, then we'll take it upon ourselves to relocate the meetings to that alternate location. Agreeable?
Tim,
Yes, ma'am.
this is Diane again. I'm asking, I have never heard about this capacity of 30 before. Is this a COVID requirement?
Yes, normally this room accommodates 80 or 82 people.
Stephen's comment was it typically can host approximately 80 individuals in this room, but due to COVID precautions, it's been reduced to 30.
Correct.
Well, those requirements may disappear soon. I'm just thinking.
Or you could have a new variant that's even like the Delta, who knows?
I think we'll have to remain flexible, and it doesn't sound like there's any opposition for the group. We'll endeavor to locate a meeting facility in which we can accommodate the maximum number of in-person attendees while still having effective virtual meeting components.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
And what we do in two other regions I work with is we do in person with an online listen only. We require a quorum of members at the physical location for voting, because with any technical issues, if someone gets kicked off, they can't hear properly. That's how we address it in our other two planning issues. But then we still have it posted online for the people to hear what's going on and be as open as possible.
Sure.
But it's online listen only.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pruski. Yeah, I think moving forward, at least at this moment, we can adjust at future meetings. We anticipate the next meeting being a hybrid meeting at one of the two facilities. We'll resolve that before making the posting, but we, at least at this moment, have a certain location to meet. And we will make those postings so the public has the ability to join our meetings virtually as well. So through the meeting, we've identified a number of agenda items. I won't go over that again, that we'll place on the notice for the February meeting. Are there any additional agenda items that the members want to identify now for being considered to be put on that agenda? And of course, if you can't identify them now and you identify them in the interim period before the posting, let us know and we can try to place that. For the benefit of the membership, at least the new membership, I want to make sure you're aware that prior to this planning group meeting, there's a preparation meeting, if you will, that's held. We refer to it as staff work group meeting. That meeting typically occurs 2 weeks in advance of this meeting. And frankly, that's the time in which, when properly done, we establish the agenda items for the meeting notice, etc. And so, for the benefit of the membership, if you would like an agenda item placed on an upcoming meeting, or the nearest meeting, doing so at least 2 weeks in advance is optimal, or more. So with that, is there any discussion regarding meetings or agenda items for future meetings? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to get a report from the staff with respect to what the TWD board requires of us to have as far as membership is concerned. This is a grassroots or bottom-up planning approach that looks at the different choices from, the public and environmental and steam electric and municipalities and counties and groundwater districts, etc. But because it seems of late we don't have as much participation or people wanting to serve, I don't want to exclude anybody, but if we don't have to fill a seat, that's what I'm asking is, in these categories, what is the minimum number required to satisfy the Water Development Board? And if we exceed that, if we don't have a vacancy that can be filled, we just don't exceed it until the next regular round of filling those seats.
We can place on the agenda an item to review the legislative membership requirements for regional planning groups and compare that to the membership that's present and the categories that are present on the regional planning group. And we'll see where that discussion leads us, but we can accomplish that at the next meeting, a brief report on that.
Do you want me to just provide some real quick? Is that okay?
Yes, sure, absolutely.
So there are 12 categories that the planning groups have to fill, and they just need to have one member from each category. But the planning groups are allowed to have additional representatives from those categories. The minimum is just one.
The minimum of one.
Of 12 categories. Plus GMA membership.
Right, right, and then some non-voting members.
Are required.
But I can prepare some information on that.
If you coordinate with Kendall, that'd be appreciated, so we can compare it to our membership.
Well, in the beginning, we had a lot of interest.
Yeah.
And we wanted to try to be fair and to allow rural America and the municipalities and the counties and everybody to put a reasonable amount of people on the board that was within reason.
Right.
And we were one of the largest planning groups in the state too, volume-wise or quantity-wise. So if that's either one person per category, then, if we don't get people that are interested in serving, a lot of time, effort, and energy and expense on trying to fill a seat after you put out notice, nobody applies, let's move on.
I believe power generation is one of the enumerated interest groups, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Right. So in that case, that's
We
one.
have to find
Yes,
something.
that's right. Yes, sir. Okay, very fine. We'll add that to the agenda of the next meeting. Any other discussion regarding meetings and agenda items for future meetings? Okay, there being none, we'll move to agenda item 13. Is there anyone present in person or virtually that would like to make public comment at this time? Okay. There being none, we'll move to adjournment.
Tim, I want to ask a question before we close. With this format, I cannot find a way to mute or unmute myself. Can someone tell me how to do that with WebEx?
I will call.
Diane, Steven's going to give you a call and try to assist you so that you can
Thank you.
better participate. Thank you. Okay, if there's no other discussion, is there a motion to adjourn?
I made it.
Mr. Middleton made a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Mr. Taggart, second. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll stand adjourned until our next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.